Welcome back, everyone. Today I wanted to look at and analyze the data and evidence behind my hypothesis. Just in case you don't know, my hypothesis is actually three: the latent eusociality hypothesis, the epigenetic suppression hypothesis, and the eusocial restoration hypothesis. The hypotheses. If humans are fundamentally a eusocial species, naturally predisposed to selfless cooperation and collective care, then the observed patterns of individualistic and tribalistic behavior are not our true nature, but are instead phenotypic expressions of accumulated genetic trauma that has prioritized survival-based hypervigilance over pro-sociality since the divergence of our lineage. The expression of human eusocial traits, such as division of labor and cooperative brood care, is epigenetically suppressed by transgenerational trauma markers. These markers, accumulated through millions of years of environmental stressors, maintain the human brain in a state of individualistic survival mode, preventing the formation of a true superorganism. And finally, humans are a biologically eusocial species whose natural capacity for collective cooperation was disrupted by accumulated genetic and cultural trauma. This trauma, dating back to ancient environmental upheavals, triggered the breakdown of our bicameral cooperative state and forced the development of individualistic consciousness as a survival mechanism. Therefore, prioritizing global mental health is the necessary biological and cultural intervention to resolve this ancient trauma, allowing the human species to transition from individualistic survival back to a self-aware, intentional eusocial superorganism. Now I will present the supporting research. Research into the Gaia hypothesis and collective consciousness intersects at the idea that Earth functions as a single integrated living entity. While the Gaia hypothesis is primarily a scientific framework for planetary self-regulation, collective consciousness provides a psychological and philosophical lens through which we view human interconnectedness within that system. The Gaia hypothesis, Earth as a superorganism. Proposed by James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis in the 1970s, the Gaia hypothesis suggests that living organisms and their inorganic surroundings form a self-regulating complex system to maintain the conditions for life. The system regulates variables like global temperature, ocean salinity, and atmospheric oxygen through homeostatic feedback loops. In the simplest terms, homeostasis is the process by which a system maintains a stable internal state while the environment around it changes. It is the biological thermostat. To answer critics who argued that planetary regulation would require conscious foresight, Lovelock created Daisy World. This mathematical model shows how simple competition between black and white daisies can stabilize a planet's temperature without any conscious planning. Here's the scientific standing. There's weak Gaia, the widely accepted view that life significantly influences the environment, or strong Gaia, the more controversial view that the Earth system aims for optimal conditions, often criticized for being teleological, implying that there's a goal or purpose. On the Gaia hypothesis, homeostasis is the central fact that makes this theory work. Here is how it functions across different scales. The biological mechanism in a human or animal, homeostasis is a constant balancing act that manages negative feedback loops. If you get too hot, your body triggers sweating to cool down. If you get too cold, you shiver to generate heat. Your body maintains a specific pH in your blood and a specific concentration of glucose. If these drift too far, you die. James Lovelock argued that Earth, the planetary mechanism, exhibits homeostasis. Instead of a brain or nervous system, it uses biogeochemical loops. The mathematical fact, negative feedback. Every homeostatic system requires three parts: a sensor, which detects the change, the control center, which processes the info, and the effector, which acts to fix the change. While Lovelock did not originally claim Gaia was conscious, many researchers and philosophers have expanded the theory to include a collective consciousness. Some modern interpretations suggest that just as neurons collectively form a human brain, the interaction of all living things, including humans and technology, could form a planetary intelligence. Recent studies in social neuroscience suggest that consciousness may have evolved specifically to solve social problems, such as predicting others' behavior to stay together as a group. Julian Jaynes believed that consciousness did not evolve biologically, but was a cultural intervention that developed from the breakdown of the bicameral mind. This is why I suggest that social problems have not been solved yet. Theories such as the noosphere suggest that the internet and digital networks are accelerating a shared human consciousness, effectively serving as a nervous system for the planet. The noosphere is the sphere of human thought, a third stage of Earth's development, following the geosphere and the biosphere, characterized by the emergence of a collective human consciousness and mental activity that transforms the planet, though I'll argue it's more than just human consciousness. Research often compares the collective behavior of humans to eusocial species like ants and bees, which function as superorganisms. Evolutionary biologists like Richard Dawkins have argued that natural selection acts on individuals, not whole planets, making the idea of an evolved global purpose difficult to justify scientifically. While Richard Dawkins argues that natural selection acts only on the individual, the evolution of termites into superorganisms proves that biologically, individuality can scale upward when cooperation becomes the optimal survival strategy. If humans are inherently a eusocial species whose collective potential has been suppressed by accumulated genetic trauma since the era of LUCA, then our current fragmented state is a biological malfunction rather than our true nature. Because Earth is the only known planet to harbor life, it functions as a single, self-regulating Darwinian individual. Therefore, the standardized prioritization of global mental health is not merely a social goal, but the necessary biological intervention to heal the internal trauma of this planetary organism, finally allowing humanity to operate as a unified functional component of the Gaian system. Research often compares the collective behavior of humans to eusocial species like ants and bees, which function as superorganisms. In direct opposition to Gaia, the Media hypothesis suggests that life is inherently self-destructive and frequently triggers mass extinctions rather than maintaining balance. Humans are already developing technologies designed to mimic or support natural homeostasis at both the biological and planetary scales. While these systems aren't yet as efficient as 4 billion years of evolution, they use the same feedback loop principles discussed. To support the Gaia hypothesis of a self-regulating Earth, scientists are proposing Gaia 2.0, using technology as a deliberate regulatory layer. Companies like Planetary Technologies are developing antacids for the ocean to neutralize excess, mirroring the natural carbon silicate cycle. Proposed technologies like stratospheric aerosol injection aim to reflect sunlight, acting as an artificial volcanic cooling loop, though conspiracy theorists consider this to be nefarious. Near real-time monitoring through satellite networks and AI creates a global nervous system that tracks planetary boundaries like soil health and emissions. In medicine, we are moving from fixing problems to reverse engineering the body's natural balance. Technologies like continuous glucose monitors and automated insulin pumps function as a proportional integral control system, replacing the homeostatic role of the pancreas. Researchers are creating artificial cells that can collectively regulate their local pH, mimicking how living tissues protect themselves from environmental fluctuations. Scientists have built analog circuits modeled after thermosensitive neurons to create artificial temperature regulation systems for robots. While we can build individual loops like a thermostat or a dialysis machine, we have not yet replicated the extreme resilience of natural systems. Biological systems heal by redirecting internal energy to repair tissue. Most human tech is brittle. It cannot yet self-repair or spontaneously evolve new homeostatic loops when the environment shifts. As shown in our previous math, human supercomputers require massive power compared to the 20-watt homeostasis of the human brain. Research into the Gaia hypothesis and collective consciousness focuses on measurable feedback loops and emergent biological behaviors that allow complex systems to function as a single unit. The Gaia hypothesis posits that Earth is a self-regulating system where living organisms, the biota, influence the physical and chemical environment to maintain habitability. The claw hypothesis mechanism suggests a negative feedback loop where warmer ocean temperatures increase the growth of phytoplankton. These organisms produce dimethyl sulfide, which enters the atmosphere and acts as seeds for cloud formation. Increased cloud cover reflects more sunlight, effectively cooling the planet. Planets and microorganisms regulate atmospheric homeostasis through photosynthesis and by accelerating rock weathering. Plant roots and soil fungi increase the surface area of rocks exposed to the air, which speeds up the chemical reaction that pulls from the atmosphere to form carbonate rocks. Daisy World mathematical simulation proved that planetary regulation does not require conscious purpose. In the model, competition between black daisies, which absorb heat, and white daisies, which reflect it, naturally stabilizes the planet's temperature as its sun gets hotter, solely through individual growth rates and albedo changes. In scientific literature, collective consciousness is often studied as collective conditions or swarm intelligence, where a group performs tasks that no single individual can achieve. Eusocial superorganisms, in colonies of ants, bees, and termites, the individual members act as specialized cells. Data shows these groups use distributed information processing to solve complex problems, such as finding the shortest path to food or selecting a new nest site through consensus voting. Recent research into insects' brains has identified a central complex that supports spatial navigation and movement organization similar to the vertebrate midbrain. Experts have declared a realistic possibility that many animals, including insects and octopi, experience forms of subjective consciousness. The social complexity hypothesis suggests that consciousness evolved especially as a tool for social coordination. In this view, the ability to model the self and others allowed individuals to survive better in large groups, eventually leading to the highly connected social structures seen in humans and other social species. When specifically focused on the evolution of consciousness as a tool to model selves and others, it is often referred to as social interaction, theory of consciousness, most notably championed by psychologist Nicholas Humphrey. The Media hypothesis is a scientific framework proposed by the paleontologist Peter Ward in 2009 that directly opposes the Gaia hypothesis. It argues that multicellular life is inherently self-destructive and that life is its own worst enemy. While Gaia posits that life regulates the environment to remain habitable, Media suggests that biological activity frequently triggers mass extinctions and environmental collapse. Ward points to the geological record, arguing that all but one of Earth's major mass extinctions were caused by life itself, rather than external factors like asteroids. Research supporting this hypothesis cites several catastrophic events triggered by biological activity. The Great Oxidation Event, which happened 2.45 billion years ago, early cyanobacteria evolved photosynthesis and released oxygen as a byproduct. This was toxic to the dominant anaerobic microbes of the time, causing a planetary scale poisoning and mass extinction. Photosynthesizing organisms repeatedly removed so much carbon dioxide and methane from the atmosphere that they triggered global deep freeze events, nearly sterilizing the planet. Ward argues that past warming events, often triggered by geological activity, caused oceans to stop mixing. This allowed anaerobic bacteria to thrive, which released lethal amounts of hydrogen sulfide gas, poisoning the atmosphere and destroying the ozone layer. The hypothesis predicts a terminal decline for complex life based on current biological trends. Carbon dioxide depletion, photosynthetic organisms, and biologically driven rock weathering have steadily reduced atmospheric pressure over the last 200 million years. The 10 ppm limit, Ward calculates that in roughly 500 to 900 million years, biological activity will drive levels below 10 parts per million. At this concentration, plants can no longer survive, leading to the collapse of the entire aerobic food chain. Measurements of the geological record suggest that Earth's total biomass actually peaked roughly 1 billion years ago and has been on a long-term decline due to these Median feedback loops. Recovery is possible, though. It is factually true that microbes group together and exhibit collective behaviors that mimic a multicellular body. This grouping is not random, but is driven by sophisticated biological and chemical mechanisms. I suggest that Earth utilizes Median feedback loops where life-driven processes inadvertently create environmental crises, not as a means of self-destruction, but as a recursive filter that demands higher complexity for survival. These cycles of biological stress act as a transgenerational pressure, forcing life to evolve more sophisticated social coordination to withstand the very instabilities it creates. In this view, accumulated genetic trauma is the biological record of these Median events. However, it is also the catalyst that pushes the biosphere toward a conscious, self-regulating state where prioritizing global mental health becomes the ultimate feedback loop to ensure long-term stability and complexity. I acknowledge Peter Ward's Medea hypothesis, but flip the script. The destruction is the engine of complexity. I am arguing that trauma isn't just a mistake. It's an environmental debt that humans must now pay by evolving into a more cooperative superorganism. It fits the unintentional requirement by suggesting Earth doesn't plan this. Rather, the mathematical necessity of surviving a Median crisis results in more complex systems. Most bacteria in nature do not live as a single free-floating cell, but instead aggregate into dense, highly organized communities called biofilms. Within a biofilm, individual cells specialize in specific tasks, such as producing food, defending the colony, or focusing on reproduction, acting more like specialized tissues in a larger body. Living in a group allows microbes to withstand antibiotics and environmental stresses up to 1,000 times better than when they are alone. To coordinate these groups, microbes use a chemical communication system called quorum sensing. As I stated before, this is one of the things required for a global homeostatic balance, which is why I believe the Earth is a superorganism with bacteria that constantly release small signaling molecules. When enough bacteria are present in one area, the concentration of these signals hits a quorum, a critical threshold. Once the threshold is reached, it triggers a simultaneous change in gene expression across the entire group. This allows thousands of individual cells to act at once. Scientific research identifies several active collective behaviors in these groups. Some researchers describe these organized biofilms as a form of bacterial consciousness or intelligence. As the colony processes sensory inputs and produces complex adaptive outputs that no single cell can manage alone, the foundational building block for complex life was the emergence of organized biofilms, which functioned as a primitive distributive intelligence. By processing sensory inputs and coordinating adaptive responses as a single unit, these bacterial colonies provided the first template for the superorganism, allowing life to survive early Median events that would have decimated isolated cells. This suggests that eusociality is not a late-stage evolutionary luxury, but a core survival mechanism encoded since the dawn of life. Consequently, modern human fragmentation is a regression from this ancient biofilm logic. caused by the compounding weight of genetic trauma accumulated across eons of environmental upheaval. From the perspective of the media hypothesis, these oases were the ground zero for the coming catastrophe. As these oases grew and merged, the oxygen eventually overwhelmed the planet's ability to absorb it, leading to the mass extinction of the anaerobic microbes that had ruled Earth for about 1.5 billion years. This is the first biological fact of collective existence. Every complex life form on Earth is actually a team of once independent microbes that surrendered their individuality to become a single, more powerful unit. Billions of independent cells grouped together to act as one. Those groups became so tightly integrated that they evolved into a single new individual. Connecting to collective consciousness, the end Ediacarian extinction is particularly interesting. It represents the moment when the stationary collective, life that looked like leaves or mats, was replaced by mobile collectives, animals with guts and nervous systems. This shift required a higher level of internal coordination and individual agency, setting the stage for the complex brains that we see today. The red algae Bangiomorpha dated to about 1.05 billion years ago. It is the earliest known sexually reproducing life form. Sex is a fundamental shift from individual replication to a collective genetic strategy. It allowed organisms to mix their DNA, creating a shared genetic pool that accelerated evolution far beyond what simple cloning could achieve. By 1.2 billion years ago, these terrestrial microbial communities were abundant enough to affect global weathering and geochemical cycles. This represents a collective impact on the planet's physical state, a core tenet of the Gaia hypothesis. For a species to become eusocial, it must undergo a genetic trade-off. Over millions of years as eusocial species often lose genes related to individual survival, like certain immune responses or specialized foraging senses. Because they rely on the collective's protection and food supply, if the instructions for the collective are written in the DNA, it suggests that the collective behavior is a physical, heritable trait, not just a learned behavior. It means that the group is a biological reality as real as a heartbeat. Just as ants lost individual weaponry, like larger mandibles, in favor of the colony, humans underwent self-domestication. Over the last 30,000 years, human brains have actually decreased in size by about 10%. One theory is that we offloaded individual cognitive processing power to the group. We don't need to know everything to survive. We just need to belong to a group that knows everything. For a honeybee, being cast out of the hive is a death sentence because it has lost the metabolic ability to regulate its own temperature. Similarly, human infants are the most vulnerable in the animal kingdom, requiring years of collective care. Our immune system are even linked to sociality. Loneliness has been shown to downregulate genes related to antiviral responses, suggesting our bodies literally expect the group to be there to help fight off threats. While eusocial insects use pheromones, we use language and myth. These are the signaling molecules that allow millions of unrelated humans to act as a single unit. Because we can pass down survival strategies through teaching, we don't wait for genetic mutations to adapt. Our collective DNA, our culture, evolves at warp speed. The reproduction-only definition is a major point of scientific tension. While the classical Crespi and Yaniga definition insists on permanent, irreversible sterility for a species to be truly eusocial, many modern biologists argue this is too rigid. The debate centers on whether eusociality is a binary switch, you are or you aren't, or a spectrum of collective behavior. Many researchers argue that defining eusociality based solely on the sterile caste ignores the degree of sociality in other species. They use terms like subsocial or semisocial to bridge the gap. Some bees can choose to either be a worker or go off and start their own nesting, depending on environmental cues. If they can switch back, the classic definition says they aren't eusocial, but their behavioral coordination is identical to those that are. If we only count sterile species, we exclude thousands of species that behave as integrated collectives but keep the reproductive options open. To conclude this video, most of this is data, and I will be showing the references. Some may say that my hypothesis is not credible, but I am just having fun doing the research. What I do want to say is that the downsides of what the legal structure would be is extremely scary. But I believe that a eusocial society can still exist without the loss of freedoms. What makes us different as humans is our ability to find value in anything and anyone. But please just don't forget that we are animals too. Just imagine affordable childcare, the ending of world hunger, and as I was researching this, possibly even the end of war. It is easy to assume that this is only achievable through laws and a way of life that is unacceptable. But that is only because that this is the type of power structure that we have been living in since the start of governments themselves. That is why I find mental health to be the very answer to all of these sufferings that we see today. If accumulated genetic trauma suppresses human eusociality, then prioritizing global mental health serves as a biological antidote. By utilizing evidence-based therapies like problem-solving therapy at scale, we can modulate epigenetic markers of stress, effectively re-unlocking our species. Latent capacity for selfless, large-scale cooperation. The solution to human failures to operate eusocially is the standardization of global mental health practice. By treating mental well-being as a national development priority, we reduce the survival-based hypervigilance that leads to tribalism, allowing for the division of labor and social cohesion characteristic of advanced social species. Studies suggest that epigenetic markers like DNA methylation are not permanent. Positive conditioning and therapeutic interventions can reverse the biological scarring of trauma. Prioritizing the mental health of youth and parents yields intergenerational benefits, potentially breaking the cycle of inherited trauma that has accumulated since ancient times. Experts note that social connection is a critical factor in mental health recovery. Thus, a eusocial structure, high community support, and mental health are mutually reinforcing. Thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you next time.
Bonnie Bassler studies how bacteria use chemical signaling to coordinate collective behaviors. J. William Costerton, the father of biofilm science, introduced the term biofilm. Eshel Ben Jacob pioneered the study of microbial intelligence, suggesting bacterial colonies exhibit, quote, social intelligence. Armin Jalali connects stigmergy and chaos theory to describe biofilm as bacterial consciousness. Antony van Leeuwenhoek made the first historical observation of biofilms. Rachel Yehuda is a pioneer in epigenetic trauma research, studying Holocaust survivors. Elizabeth Binder researches the FKBP5 gene, a stress response switch altered by early life trauma. Isabel Mansui shows trauma symptoms can pass down generations via small RNA. Michael Meany and Moshe Jaif proved that maternal care quality can permanently change gene expression related to stress response. E.O. Wilson coined eusociality. Other researchers modeled how cooperative structures evolve and how trauma can be addressed. Catherine Panterbrick directs a program focused on how socio-emotional learning and resilience building can mitigate the biological impacts of trauma in refugee populations. The Gaia hypothesis, proposed by James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis, suggests Earth is a self-regulating system that maintains conditions for life. The foundational text is Gaia, a new look at life on Earth from 1979, with The Ages of Gaia, 1988, offering a more detailed scientific biography. Countering this is the Medea hypothesis, coined by Peter Ward, which argues that multicellular life is inherently self-destructive and often leads to its own extinction. The primary source for this counter theory is Ward's 2009 book, The Medea Hypothesis: Is Life on Earth Ultimately Self-Destructive? Sources on mass extinction include Peter Ward's Under a Green Sky, which explores how past global warming triggered greenhouse extinctions. A. Hallam's Catastrophes and Lesser Calamities examines the varied causes of Earth's Big Five die-offs. For Microbiology Foundations, Microbiology: An Introduction by Tortora, Funke, and Case is a standard comprehensive textbook. Essential Microbiology by Stuart Hogg offers a clear entry into the diversity and applied roles of microbes. Major works by E.O. Wilson include Sociobiology: The New Synthesis, which explores the biological basis of social behavior. Consilience argues for uniting sciences and humanities. And The Superorganism examines insect colonies as integrated units. References on collective consciousness include the term's origin by Emil Durkheim and Peter Godfrey Smith's Other Minds on the biological evolution of awareness. Gödel, Escher, Bach discusses consciousness distributed across multiple organisms, like ant colonies.